Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app, and we'll keep sharing great conversations. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. The now cliched Great Resignation is certainly upon us. Nearly 13 million American workers quit their jobs in the third quarter of 2021 alone in search of, we'll call it, more fulfilling work experiences. 74% of full-time employees say they will search for a new job in 2022, according to a recent job list survey of 20,000 job seekers. The pandemic has caused us to focus on our quality of life, our priorities, and of course, our health. Better work-life balance and a better healthcare system could be what ultimately get us out of both the pandemic and the Great Resignation. What we'll call the digital disruption that's underway in healthcare is a topic that, frankly, we haven't discussed much on this podcast, but it's adjacent to the topics that we discuss every week. Things like your data, the ethics of AI, digitization at work, and even the cultural implications of automation. That's all going to finally change this week. We're joined by Paddy Padmanabhan, CEO of Damo Consulting, a digital strategy consulting company for healthcare tech leaders. Paddy's based in Chicago, and his team has been working with healthcare organizations and technology companies for about a decade to help them define their digital strategies. Paddy's also the author of Healthcare Digital Transformation and host of the Big Unlock podcast. Without further ado, Paddy, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Let's get started by having you share a little bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been in healthcare tech now for over 20 years. I was in the big four consulting firms, and about a decade or so ago, I became an entrepreneur. Among other things, I was in two healthcare-focused analytics startups that went through exits, and now I run my digital transformation advisory firm, Damo Consulting, as you mentioned. Along the way, I wrote two books. One was called The Big Unlock, which was about data and analytics and how that's going to drive the digital transformation of healthcare. And the more recent one is what you just mentioned, which is Healthcare Digital Transformation, which I co-authored with Ed Marks, who was CIO at Cleveland Clinic at the time. And so it's been an interesting journey. I have been in healthcare, like I said, for a long time, mostly looking at it from a technology perspective. And the digital transformation of healthcare is really about technology-led transformation. And within that, there's a lot of things that we can include in the definition of technology-enabled transformation. You've seen the pandemic has given rise to an accelerated growth of telehealth and virtual care modalities. The AI and advanced analytics journey is well underway, and it's making progress, in some areas more than in others. And a lot of other emerging technologies are also coming into play. You mentioned the Great Resignation, and in that context, tools like voice recognition are coming into play to try and alleviate the workload and the burden on caregivers. So these are among the several things that we focus on as a company, and I spend time on in analyzing as we go through this exciting transformation that we're all living through.
So let's talk about the most recent book. So Healthcare Digital Transformation. What are some of the main themes? And then more importantly, what's the single thing that you learned while researching that surprised you most?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of a backstory on the book. So the foundation for the book was the work that my co-author and I did together when, as I mentioned, he was the CIO of Cleveland Clinic. Now, we had written the entire manuscript up, and we based that on over 150 interviews with healthcare and healthcare technology leaders. What we really wanted to do was capture the essence of what was going on in terms of the digital transformation of the healthcare sector. And we completed the manuscript, we broke it out into a number of themes, and those themes are all in the book. We talked about the consumerism of consumerization of healthcare as one of the themes. We talk about the transformation of the backend technology infrastructure through advanced technologies like cloud and AI as another theme. We talked about the exploding digital health startup ecosystem, which was powering the transformation of healthcare through innovative new solutions. These were some of the themes that we covered in the book. And these were all themes that were playing out in the transformation of healthcare. We submitted the manuscript to our publisher in February of 2020. And we all know what happened right after that. So we held off on releasing the book. We went back and did more research. And we felt that the themes that we had talked about in the book were going to dramatically change because of the pandemic. Surprisingly, we found that many of the themes actually were reinforced by the pandemic, especially the shift towards telehealth and virtual care models. And there were other things that maybe didn't get impacted as much as we thought they would. So we ended up rewriting several sections in the book and actually gave it a new title. The original title was something else. But that was kind of the genesis of the book.
On a personal note, kind of anecdotally, I recently switched from Kaiser as my primary care provider to Anthem. And what has surprised me most is that the quality of the digital experience at Anthem is far, far lower than what it was at Kaiser. My perception of the quality of care is impacted by the quality of the digital experience that I have with my provider in a way that I didn't realize when I made the switch. What do you see as the biggest opportunities for healthcare providers to build trust with patients and differentiate themselves using technology?
You bring up a very, very important point. And my firm just published our annual research paper, which talks about the trends for the year. And one of the trends that we've identified, one of the priorities that we've identified as critical for healthcare organizations today is the quality of the digital health experience for consumers. And this is exactly what you're referring to. We've found that over the last few years, people have slapped on technology into their healthcare operations. So whether it is from an access standpoint or from a care delivery standpoint, but the experience is suboptimal today. The experience could be a lot better. And consumers like you and me are benchmarking our experiences to what we experience when we buy an Apple product or an Amazon product. And so it's no longer adequate to be best in class in a field that has set a low bar for itself. And so this is going to be the number one challenge. And I find when I talk to our clients and others in healthcare, the poor experience or the lack of a good experience translates very quickly into lack of adoption. And so all of the technology investments that you make are going to come to naught if your caregivers and your patients don't adopt the technology. You're not going to be able to make them use the technology if the experience is not good. And so, you've done the work of investing in the technology. The next step is invest in the experience. That's really one of the big priorities. So what you described is just one among a million such anecdotes that people are paying attention to today.
So in the world of technology, at least in enterprise software, we can often look at where the money goes. And if we follow the paper trail of the money in the form of where the venture capital is going, we can often, quote, predict the future. We can see where the disruption is up ahead. If we apply that to call it health tech, and we look at maybe some new entrants in the market, whether it's like a Forward or a Carbon Health or some innovators like that, is that an indication of the kind of healthcare ecosystem we'll see in a decade?
Well, the numbers just came out, and I believe close to $30 billion went into digital health startups in 2021. And that was, I think, more than twice the amount that went into digital health in 2020. So if that is a barometer or a benchmark, then you know that there is a lot of interest in innovative digital health startups because venture capitalists believe that some of these startups are going to transform the healthcare sector. And the transformation of the sector is underway anyway. And it also implies that there's a lot more innovators coming into healthcare, wanting to innovate, building companies, coming up with innovative new ideas to transform the delivery of care or the access to care or any other aspect of care which involves a digital interface. And so this is really what we're seeing. And I think some of these companies are going to eventually end up transforming the sector. Over the past few years, if you look at what has happened, and if you keep score by either IPOs or big profitable exits and things of that nature, you'll see where the action is. Telehealth, digital front doors, patient engagement platforms, remote monitoring platforms. The biggest, of course, was Livongo getting acquired by Teladoc last year. And we're continuing to see a lot of M&A, not to mention the biggest of them all, which was Oracle acquiring Cerner and getting into the electronic health record space, but more importantly, getting into a space which provides a huge opportunity to transform an entire sector. In fact, they talk about voice recognition technology as one of the drivers for taking the platform and transforming the experience for physicians and reducing the burden and so on. There is no shortage of problems in the healthcare experience today that can be addressed by digital health. And I think what we're seeing is this mushrooming of startups that are taking aim at one or more of these problems and making a difference, making a dent. And some of them will break through and transform the way we experience healthcare. And so we're in the middle of all this. In fact, I would say we are in relatively early stages of this transformation.
So historically, innovation cycles have looked something like this. You get kind of the disruptors that become very successful, eventually become the incumbents. And the incumbents eventually get complacent, and they leave room for a new generation of disruptors to disrupt the now incumbents. And whether you take a Netflix, an Amazon, a Tesla, I think these are all good examples of where they become behemoths, they've become the incumbents, and now they're a bunch of ankle biters that are looking to disrupt them. Is this a pattern that you expect we'll see in digital healthcare? And if so, handicap the space for us. Who do you think are the disruptors that could become the next set of incumbents?
Well, this has the pattern of disruption and the innovator's dilemma and all of that. It has played out in multiple sectors, and many sectors have been completely transformed. The internet came and transformed travel, as an example. And today you wouldn't think of calling a travel agent. You just go online and do whatever you want to do. In healthcare, the closest analogy that I can identify is accessing care through telehealth. There was a time when you used to think that a doctor office visit necessarily meant driving to a clinic and meeting with a doctor in person. That is no longer the case. You can do a real-time virtual visit for low acuity conditions. Of course, there are some things for which you're going to have to go. If you have an emergency, you have an accident, or something like that, you're going to have to go into an ER. But I'm talking about routine needs, low acuity needs, or even chronic needs, or some specialty needs like behavioral health, mental health, those kinds of things. You don't need to go see a doctor anymore. You can do it all through a virtual interface. You can do it through your phone. And if you really look at where we were 5 years ago and where we are today, and granted, the pandemic has put this over the top, it's an example of how what was a fringe and nice to have, a geeky kind of thing 5 years ago is now mainstream. And today, for me, the default is to meet with my provider through a virtual consult. The default is not to go into an office anymore. And I'd go in only if I have to go in. And I think that is becoming the default for a lot of people. And I think it's going to benefit consumers. It's going to benefit the healthcare ecosystem. Of course, it is going to rewrite the competitive landscape. So to your point, should people be thinking about it? Yes. And I think the entire healthcare ecosystem is thinking about it and transforming and changing the way it provides access to care and does, the delivery of care. But the restructuring of the industry is not complete. We are in very, very early stages. So it's going to play out over the next maybe decade or so. I won't hazard a guess on what the end state looks like and how quickly that's going to come to us. But, it is happening.
So on this podcast, we talk a lot about your data, who owns it, the power of it. What should you know when a provider uses your data to make automated decisions on your behalf? How transparent should it be? Should there be regulation? Those kinds of themes. Now, this certainly applies to the world of healthcare. We have things like HIPAA in place already that restrict how your data can be used. This strikes me as one area where the disruptors are at a disadvantage because they lack the data that casually calling them the incumbents have. To what extent will that constrain innovation, the lack of access to patient data?
This is a central challenge in the transformation of healthcare, the access to the data. Now, mind you, when we talk about access to patient medical records, we are essentially talking about electronic health record, EHR data that sits within the platforms of these big companies like Epic and Cerner and Allscripts and so on. But we're also seeing the emergence of multiple other data sources, which, when combined with patient medical records sitting in EHRs, can provide a more comprehensive view of patients to drive either behavior changes, lifestyle changes, or diagnosis and treatment. An example of this would be what Apple is trying to do with their Apple Health app. Apple, if you own an Apple device, you can record all of your exercise data, as an example. It gets automatically collected by the app, and that data can be shared with your provider. And the provider can choose to pull the data in, look at your exercise patterns, and look at maybe other things that you're recording, and combine that with data that is within their system and come up with better treatment plans for you. You can also pull your EHR data into your phone app and then look at your own data on an ongoing basis. There are some restrictions around who gets access to the data, how they can use it. The final CMS interoperability rule that went into effect last year essentially opens the door for some limited access to the data for the developer community at large. Now, that access will increase as time goes by. And when that happens, what we're really seeing is the opportunity for innovators to come in, gain access to the data, and come up with new and innovative solutions. And it's been a challenge. Interoperability, access to patient data, it has been a challenge, but it's, the obstacles are slowly being dismantled, partly through market pressure, partly through consumer expectations and needs, and partly through regulatory action. And so that's a good thing in my view. Now, is it a wild west where anyone can gain access to the data and do anything they want with it? No, and maybe it shouldn't be. So we just have to be careful about how we get access to the data and what we do with it, because there is potential for harm. If the data falls into the wrong hands and is used in unintended ways, or quite frankly, in not so beneficial ways for consumers. So patient safety, patient privacy. These are important themes that we need to keep in our minds as we pursue innovation.
We often say that whoever has the data wins. And you could make an argument that Amazon has the data. They now have Amazon Care. You mentioned Apple and health and the Apple Watch and that sort of thing. Is it credible that the healthcare providers of the future are Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google?
It's possible. It's possible. Again, these are companies with big ambitions, big bank accounts, and not afraid to make big bets. So Amazon Care is an example. Now, Amazon Care is at the edges today. Let's not forget, Amazon is a big company, but they're a relatively tiny company when it comes to healthcare. Amazon Care is interesting for one reason alone to me, which is that it's the first time a big tech firm has gotten directly into the healthcare services business. The others are content to stay with enabling healthcare through technology platforms. So Microsoft with its cloud platforms, Oracle now with the Cerner acquisition, Apple with its devices, and so on and so forth. Excuse me. The point of the Amazon Care experiment is that now they're going to get into the primary care space. They're going to deliver care services. Is it possible that tomorrow they could extend that and buy a couple of big hospitals? Yes. Is it possible that they could go out and buy another EHR company? Yes. Do they have the money for it? Certainly. Do they have the will? Looks like it. Will they do it? We don't know. We don't know how far they're going to go. Now, all the big tech firms are potentially disruptors in the healthcare space because they have the ability, the financial ability, they have the experience with consumers and how to manage consumer-oriented businesses. What they don't have is managing healthcare businesses. And healthcare businesses are built on trust. You trust your local hospital, your local clinic, your PCP, and that's how it works. How you replicate that in the context of a technology-enabled care model remains to be seen.
The traditional healthcare model is that when I'm sick, I go to a hospital. And when I need a procedure, I go to the hospital. And now you mentioned like Teladoc and the general trend toward telemedicine. That's kind of been inverted. I don't go to a hospital unless I need a procedure done. There's some specialized equipment. How long before the hospital comes to me? And polish your crystal ball. Is there a point where I swallow a pill that's a camera and, my doctor can remotely operate on me, or when I need a procedure done, the procedure comes to me in the form of a doctor showing up at my house? Is that credible?
Well, let's acknowledge that care is already moving away from the hospital to the home. Certain aspects of care are already in the home. You can now conceivably age at home if you're relatively healthy and free of acute conditions. The technology exists for a physician or your hospital to monitor you while you're at home through a range of sensors and devices. Intervene as necessary because it's throwing off all the data that can be gathered up at the back end and analyzed in real time to intervene as required. And if you need care at home, increasingly there are services that will take care of patients in their homes. If you need a nurse to visit you, take your vitals, or you need somebody, increasingly a lot of health-related needs are not so much medical needs as lifestyle needs. Somebody to deliver your prescriptions to you because you're not mobile for whatever reason. Somebody to come in and check in on your vitals because you're not mobile. Somebody to deliver food to you, a nutritious food to you because you're not mobile. So on and so forth. And a lot of these needs are being addressed by a range of services. Now, Amazon Care that you mentioned already has that built into their model. They They will send somebody over to your home if you have a condition that requires somebody to visit you. And there are other digital first healthcare providers who will send a doctor over to your home. So it's kind of, a century ago, the doctor used to come to your home. That was kind of the default model for care. We may be going back to that. However, you will still need to go into the hospital for acute procedures. And whether some of those procedures can come to your home, time will tell. But I think there is definitely a trend of care moving away from the hospital to the home. It has got long-term implications for the healthcare sector as a whole, especially hospitals and health systems that rely on people walking in through their doors and on the foot traffic to run their business. That's going to change.
One of the things we talk a lot about on this program is that all AI is a data problem. And the quality of AI is directly related to the quality and quantity of data that AI model is able to be trained on. Now, this is particularly applicable in a healthcare context. And yet the data used to make healthcare related decisions is often it's PII, it's personally identifiable information, it's very sensitive information. So there's this conundrum where, as a patient, I want the benefit of models that have been trained on better data. But as a patient, I don't necessarily want to volunteer my X-rays or my MRIs to be the ones training this data. So kind of two questions I have for you with regard to that. One is, how aware should I be when a medical provider has access to and is using my data to benefit everyone, including myself, in the form of training models? And then B, to what extent do you think we're going to regulate our way around using patient data, which potentially could constrain innovation?
As a patient, I don't think you need to be particularly concerned about analytics programs where a large data set, let's say from your hospital provider, is being analyzed for trends, to identify trends in the population that can be actioned upon, as long as you're not personally identified in the data. And most AI and advanced analytics programs, in fact, all, I think by law and by regulation, will ensure that you're not personally identified. Now, as a consumer, I think you will benefit by having your hospital provider, in partnership with their technology partners and their analytics teams, to come up with new ways of identifying whether you're at risk for developing a condition and intervening in advance so that you don't develop the condition, or you can manage it adequately. And I think there's a lot of benefit to doing that. Now, where I think the current analytics programs fall short is that they are either unable to make sense of the data in a way that is meaningful and impactful, or they're doing it in a way that highlights some of the shortcomings in the data itself, such as racial bias. And let me address both of them. You could have access to a lot of data, but if you're not able to use the data, and if you're not able to generate the kind of insights that can make a real and meaningful difference, you don't really have a program in place. And one example of how this may this may fall apart is, we've seen IBM Watson Health, for instance, that went after cancer care in a big way, based on being able to analyze large data sets and coming up with insights using the Watson engine. And we know that they didn't really succeed, and they've recently been sold off. All the data assets have been sold off. So having the data alone isn't enough. You have to know what kind of data you have. You have to have really impactful ways of generating insights that can make a difference. The flip side to the coin is, if you've got data that is heavily biased, And I like to take the example of genomic data. I am of Indian descent, and most databases here in the United States are not adequately, the data sets don't adequately represent people with my kind of background. And so if you have a thin data set, or if you have a data set that is skewed towards one kind of a segment of a population, then you can come up with some imperfect predictions and conclusions. And I think, and I take that as a very simple example, but there have been real examples of how inherent biases in the data can translate into very serious unintended consequences. It could be discrimination, as an example, either for employment or for care delivery or for other even more serious consequences. So we have to be careful, but that's not to say that we should not be optimistic. I personally am very optimistic about the potential for data to make a difference in healthcare in future. I just think we need to wrangle it and continue to wrangle it to a point where we feel more comfortable. Look, today we go on to our Amazon online store, and they're constantly making recommendations to you based on your previous buying history and the buying history of people like you. And all these algorithms are running in the background, and they very often come up with some really good recommendations. And do we object? No, we're fine with it because there's no serious adverse consequences, at least on the face of it. I mean, people will make arguments that there are some adverse consequences, but on the face of it, there isn't a big downside to getting recommendations about what you might want to buy if you bought something. But healthcare is a little bit different. If you take imperfect recommendations and you make healthcare decisions, the consequences are far more severe than just getting a wrong recommendation to buy a book or a widget or some device on Amazon.
So the title of this podcast is AI and the Future of Work. So let's fast forward to 2032. Paddy, you and I are having a version of this conversation. Which professions or fields have been most impacted by AI? And I guess to put a finer point on that, which jobs are eliminated and which jobs are created and which jobs are augmented by AI?
All in 2032, again, I wish I knew what was going to happen in 2032. I could make it a very profitable occupation. However, if I look at it, I think jobs that involve a lot of manual labor today are progressively going to be consumed by automation technologies, automation and AI. And we're already seeing that. Large parts of healthcare, for instance, the administrative side of healthcare, they're being automated. In health insurance companies, claim processing is automated, has been automated for a while now, and it continues. The process of identifying, fraud and abuse and waste, there are advanced algorithms running behind the scenes that are constantly, providing inputs to human decision makers. So humans will end up being the consumers of these advanced insights, and humans will also be the beneficiaries of having a lot of the grunt work taken away from their lives. We'll end up doing a lot of things that we don't even know about today. 20 years ago, there was no such thing as social media. 25 years ago, there was no such thing as the internet. 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a mobile phone. So the technologies that are going to impact the way we live and work in future may not even be here today as we speak. And it'll be very interesting to see what comes at the end of another 10 years. But we certainly know that the use of data to power our lives and our experiences and our work is going to increase. How that's going to happen, whether it's going to happen behind the scenes in a kind of a passive, ambient kind of way, or whether it's going to happen in a more intentional way, what are the guardrails we're going to put around it as a society? Those are going to be the big questions of the future.
Paddy, I got to get you off the hot seat. It feels like we're just getting started. I would love to have you back and to continue the conversation. How does that sound?
That'd be fantastic. It's been a great conversation. You've made me think about a lot of things, Dan. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
you as well. Uh, if you're interested in versions of this conversation, I'd encourage you to go out and get Paddy's book. Paddy, where can our audience find the book?
Go to thebigunlock.com, which is my personal page, or my company website, or just Google me. You'll find it.
Just a fascinating conversation, and really appreciate you coming by, and look forward to continuing it in the future.
Thank you, Dan. All the best.
Well, there you have it, the future of AI in healthcare with Paddy Padmanabhan. This is your host, Dan Turchin, signing off for this week, but we're back next week with another fascinating guest.